Hi, welcome back. It's been a bit. I have not been active on social media or really putting out videos in a hot minute, which honestly, I gotta be honest. I mean, I almost said honestly, I gotta be honest, which would be quite redundant, but I do miss interacting with some people online. I don't necessarily miss all of it. I've been pretty busy in my day job, but we're going to get back at it. We're going to start the 2023 previews a little later than usual, but not the end of the world. We're not going to run through these the way we've done in the past, which was sort of like starting at 10 and then counting down to 1 in deciles. We're just going to start at 1 and move on. But I'm excited because this season, I think, feels, and we'll cover it, and part of the reason I think it's more wide open than it's been in the past is because of Georgia, and some changes that have happened with them in the off season. But I think importantly, it's not just Georgia that these changes have happened to. Alabama also has some coordinator changes that I think open things up a little bit as we come into this season. I think in the past couple of years, it's really felt like, a pretty limited number of real championship contenders out there. And I think this season things could open up a little bit, which is exciting. I mean, look, I could end up being quite wrong. This year could be the revenge of Mike Bobo. But based on the evidence we have, it's probably not going to be. Anyway, I'm excited to be back and starting this out. I don't know if I'm going to spend a lot more time on Twitter than I am currently, but I'm going to do these videos. I'm going to commit to doing the Saturday 6. I'm also committed to traveling for work once a month out to Los Angeles for a little bit. So schedules may change a little bit as we get into the actual season on what I'm getting out and when I'm getting it out. I'm going to try to get to at least one of these videos a week, if not more. Hopefully more. Why not? Let's aim big. Anyway, I'm excited to be back. Hit me up with any questions. Probably not on Twitter, though, because I probably won't answer them. So hit me up with any questions you have on the comments on YouTube. I don't know. Twitter managed to get even worse in the time I was gone, which is sort of surprising. Anyway, let's hop in a little bit. So Georgia, the head coach course is still Kirby Smart. Two-time defending national champion now. They were number 1, of course, in 2022 in beta rank, number 1 in 21. It doesn't always work out where the team that's number 1 in beta rank also wins the national championship. But for Georgia in the last 2 years, it certainly has. They sit at number 2 overall in our coaching and development rankings. And I think this is one of those ones that I think it's really important to understand, because I think a lot of people look at recruiting and they just don't do it right in how they evaluate coaching and development. And, teams like Alabama or teams like Georgia that recruit really well and also perform on the field often don't get enough credit for the job that they do actually turning raw talent into production. Above and beyond, a lot of other teams that recruit really well that don't at the level that they do. So they've done a terrific job here. They're at number 78 in Bill Connolly's returning production metric, number 4 in recruiting. And of course, Kirby's learned at the altar of the Church of Nick Saban, and recruiting. While Saban also emphasizes recruiting, and many of his assistants that have gone out onto their own, also heavily emphasize recruiting, and for good reason. Saban also tends to make really good hires. Kirby Smart has made excellent hires in the last couple of seasons, but it's going to be pretty interesting. 2 of the people that have made really good hires the past couple of seasons, and Saban over almost all of his career, made some interesting ones this offseason. Number 2 in special teams for the Bulldogs. That's a number they're going to want to carry forward into next season as well. You don't want to be leaving money on the table, failing. And special teams, overwhelmingly, the most important part. I know people tend to focus on the very big events. People when they think of special teams, they tend to think of like teams that get, punts and teams that either run back, kickoffs and punts for touchdowns or give up, punt and kickoff returns for touchdowns. Those are really rare events. What really counts, and particularly in college, which is a big differentiator versus like the pros where all the kickers are good. In college, not all the kickers are good. And so your ability to make points happen in the kicking game, in the place kicking game is really important here. And Georgia's done a really good job here. So let's go ahead and as we go into this, because I think as we get into Georgia, I really do want to talk about, the coordinator changes and how that sets them up. They're still, of course, projected at number one. They've had an excellent defense under Kirby Smart, and last year we're even able to shut down the number 2 offense in Tennessee really well, to the point that I think it's reasonable to say they took their foot off the gas pedal a little bit in the second half of that game. But their offense last season was also really good. And we now have a familiar face returning to take over. And some of this gets into, well, let's hop over and we can talk into, and some of this gets into kind of stuff. Oh man, are my buttons broken? That's what happens when you take a little time off. Your buttons drop. It's been a hot second since I did this, so let's hide that. There we go. Now we're on the right one. I got to get back in and fix that. All right, so offensively, Georgia last season finished at number 1 overall. They were one of 2 offenses in Beta Rank last season that finished over 2. Sort of what you might think of as a metric, a measure of real offensive performance within college football. I know that folks often think of, like the benchmark offense in college football is that 2019 LSU offense. Really set the bar for offensive performance. And they were, Beta Rank had them graded out at 2.65. Georgia last season got above 2, got to 2.11, which is a really, really solid number. Only Tennessee also got over 2 last season in their Beta Rank score. And what we think of as we might call like the era of big offense, some offenses that have really since 2017 put up some really significant numbers, sort of separated themselves from the pack. Only Georgia last season, in Tennessee last season's really put some distance, but they really did put some distance between themselves and number 3, Ohio State, who was at 1.68. That's a really, really significant difference, for them. So the offense under Todd Monken was a major driver for this team last season. And you can talk about with Stetson Bennett, how much it was Stetson Bennett, how much it was Todd Monken. Bennett, of course, was really efficient. But Monken really changed the offense from what they've been running before under new OC Mike Bobo. Welcome back. Fresh off of, Bobo, of course, like in his time away from Georgia, he was the head coach at Colorado State for a little bit. Was the offensive coordinator at South Carolina that didn't work out all that well for him. Bobo, in his time at Georgia, the best offenses that he put up were they weren't even as good. They weren't usually as good as, they weren't anywhere near as good as the last 2 seasons offense that they've put up for starters. So in 2021, Georgia put up a 1.79, not an outstanding, life-changing score, but in Monken's first year, not bad at all. Getting above 2 last season was a really big achievement for them, and really was the major driver of what made them so much better than everyone else. The defense was really good, of course, last season, but not as good as the year before. The major difference maker for the Georgia team last season was actually the offense. Now they're going to get they're going to get a decent amount of the production back. For next season, and Georgia certainly never lacks for playmakers. But it's going to be interesting seeing them come back with Bobo, whose best offenses often come in the 1.4, 1.5 range within Beta Rank. It's a significant fall off, brings Georgia much closer to being back to the pack. This is your first time ever tuning in and watching me yakety yak about college football. I really do emphasize that coordinators matter. Play calling matters. It's not just about, listen, if you don't agree with that, That's fine. Good luck analyzing what's actually driving things in college football. But coordinator change really does significantly matter. Look at how far Alabama fell off after Steve Sarkisian left. Bill O'Brien, of course, was a major fall off for Alabama. They may have an improvement over where they were last season, but I'm not saying when they get back anything near like a big offense type level. Anyway, last season, they're number 1 overall in beta rank. They were excellent at drive efficiency. That's your ability to put together long drives, to be able to put up points. It's a measure of overall sort of play calling efficiency, execution efficiency. That is a skill, being able to string together plays that are going to continue to get you positive yards, first downs, and eventually lead to touchdowns or field goals is a very, very valuable skill to have. It requires good play calling. It also requires good execution and consistent execution, and that's tough to do. Georgia was excellent at it. They were number 1 at explosive drives. This is a measure of how good you are at putting up big plays within that. Number 1 overall. These are the 2 most important components in offense or defense in beta rank, either containing or putting up explosive drives and drive efficiency. Really, really good at putting up big plays for last season. Number 2 overall in play efficiency. This is the least important of the core 4 beta rank metrics. I feel like I say that every video, but important. I mean, this is your ability to put up a consistent yards per play outside of explosives. Georgia was decent here. Like I said, it's less important than the other 3. Negative drives. Georgia did an excellent job avoiding 3 and outs, avoiding turnovers. This is, partly play calling, partly execution. Really good job here, at avoiding negative drives. Number 7 in effective rush. Number 3 in effective pass with Bennett gone. And I am not a Bennett detractor. I think Bennett quarterbacked an excellent college offense, right? And he was able to do everything that they asked of him. Now, of course, there's some self-selection there, right? Like they only asked him to do things that, Monken's a smart guy. He largely asked Stetson Bennett to do things that he could do, right? And they tailored the offense around that. But Stetson Bennett completed 68.3% of his passes. That's excellent. You're normally in college football these days, in modern college football, looking for a completion percentage north of 65% or around 65%, hitting closer to 70 for Bennett's excellent. 9.1 per, again, like that, those combinations telling you that he's getting the ball down the field and he's not just dinking and dunking underneath, and also that high completion percentage are very good. Now there are a lot of yards after catch in here. Some of those will be coming back. That's really good news for Georgia overall, but they did run the ball really well. They were a bit more ground and pound to set up the passing game under Bobo. It'll be interesting to see how much of that comes back. You have 3 likely candidates to replace Stetson Bennett currently on the team. Carson Beck is your most experienced quarterback. I believe he has something like 56 attempts in a game, mostly against Vanderbilt, I believe. Brock Vandagriff, who's a 5-star recruit, and is more mobile and is regarded to having a similar or better arm than Beck. And then Gunnar Stockton. I have terrible handwriting, so if it's not that, I apologize. I can't even read my own handwriting sometimes. Anyway, my money would be on Beck, but you never know. Vandagriff may get some playing time in as well. Georgia's likely to be up a considerable amount in some of their games, and they may be able to work both quarterbacks in. I don't think they'll be hurting, even if they have something like a little bit of a quarterback controversy present. They had according to Football Outsiders, they had 2.92 line yards. That's the rushing yards that would be attributed back to the offensive line. They graded them out at number 20 overall. And they were at number 4 in sack rate with only a 1.4% sack rate. Sacks are generally more of a quarterback stat than an offensive line stat. I would also argue they're a bit of a wide receiver and tight end stat because you got to get open there, guys. So if your quarterback's sitting around looking for a long time, sometimes that's a quarterback problem. Sometimes that's a wide receiver problem. Anyway, they're at 106 in returning production coming into this year. That's according to Bill Connolly. That's 52% coming back. That's a decent amount. I mean, I don't I don't want to give the impression that I think Georgia's offense is suddenly going to become very, very bad. And I think if you look at it in a purely linear ranking perspective, you may come back to me in the middle of the season and say, Rob, good luck finding me I'll be on YouTube, not Twitter. You're an idiot. Georgia fell from number 1 last season all the way down to like number 5. And like, what are you talking about? That's hardly going to fall off or something like that. Right. The important thing is to look at the overall number because, the distribution spreads out a bit. The cardinal ranking or the ordinal ranking that we impose, the 1 through 31 team ordinal rank gives the impression of a linear step function change, and it's not, right? Like the number 1, number 2, sometimes number 3 offenses are often like a lot better than the number 4, number 5 offenses. That distance really matters. It's the kind of thing that tells you whether you're likely to win a college football playoff game based on what you're bringing to the table rather than just luck. Yeah. So I do expect a little bit of fall off, but it was not the caliber of play caller that you have, than you have in Haddon Monken. And that's going to bring that may make Georgia more vulnerable than they have been in the past 2 seasons. Of course, the defense could come in and have more of a year like they had in 2021. Which I think would help make up for some of that gap. If that's the case, then the special teams, they'll be fine. So let's talk about the defense. Can I get that to work? No. Button has to be reconnected. All right. The defense. Your defensive coordinator. Everybody's coached at South Carolina at some point, apparently. Maybe. At least in this staff. The defense last season was excellent. Will Muschamp, of course, is your defensive coordinator. Number 1, and they were also number 1 in 21, so not so bad. Drive efficiency, they did a really good job of slowing down, drives, finding ways to get off the field, making it difficult to put together long drives against them. Number 5 in explosive drives, they were a tad bit more vulnerable here. Comparatively, you could put together some big plays against them. I do want to point out that like offenses, like the very best offenses are often putting up bigger numbers than the defenses are. And so these are scaled to where the offensive numbers are. I want to give folks an idea of like if Georgia was playing the number 1 most explosive offense in college football, which was Georgia last season. So, I guess if you saw that, you'd be seeing that in scrimmage. You might see them be able still giving up some points via big plays, even though overall they're still very good at limiting big plays. And I think this, when you look at this, they definitely had a little trouble with the good offense in Ohio State, even though they largely really handled Tennessee in the game they had. Number 1 in play efficiency, doing a really good job limiting the yards per play that opponents put up, controlling for explosives. Number 2 in negative drives, excellent job forcing 3 and outs, turnovers, bad things happening to the offense. A little bit of a split here. They were really good. Excellent against the run. Number 1 in effective rush, but number 13 in effective pass. For Georgia to get back, and again, like they were the number 1 ranked defense last season, but they weren't as good as they were in 2021. I feel like I'm like damning with faint praise. They were really good. They just weren't as good as their exceptional defense from the year before. If they're going to clean it up, they've got to both maintain what they were doing against the run, which isn't the easiest thing in the world. They definitely lost some guys to the NFL draft. And then they have to improve in defending the pass, where they struggled a little bit last season overall, being able to defend the pass. They created disruptive plays on 24% of plays last season. That's an excellent number for them. And again, it's reflected in that number 2 overall negative drive ranking. 26% of third downs were converted against them. Again, that's really good. They did a really good job, again, both contributing to that negative drive ranking. Bill Connolly has them at number 41 overall in returning production. That's a good sign for them on defense, even though defense is a little more correlated with recruiting than returning production. 70% of their production's coming back on the defensive side of the football. Let's take a look at the schedule. All right. So I don't have FCS games on here. I don't use FCS games when I run I do use FCS games when I run beta rank for FCS. I don't use FCS games when I run beta rank for FBS. And this Georgia squad, I think, add one here to your projected wins for the fact that you only see 11 games here. But we have them winning out of the 10 games or 11 games we have them winning almost 10 and a half. And out of the 8 projected conference games, we have them winning 7.5. And when you see that, what it's really telling you is we're projecting them to go undefeated. They start out with Ball State, a team projected to be very bad. The MAC was a little bit down last season, although very fun often on a weeknight game if you were watching them. But Ball State really struggled. Georgia's got a 99% win probability, a huge naive spread of 43.3. I would also just caution, I think naive spreads are going to be a bit off this season. I think scoring is going to be a little bit down in college football, and naive spreads are based off of years and years of college football data, some of which is going to have higher average spreads because the offenses were a little bit better. Scoring was down for the first time in years in college football last season. I expect it to be a little more down again this season. So now what I have is there, which is like a modeled spread, will likely be the more accurate one throughout most of the year. Then you get South Carolina, in the annual early season tilt. It's actually always a really fun one. South Carolina projects at number 46 overall. That is some improvement over where they've kind of been at. But South Carolina, they really, I like some of the pieces Beamer has in place. I'm not sold that they're going to, be able to get out there and compete. Look, if it's possible, if Georgia's, shuffling along, I say scuffling along, if Georgia is more mortal, if Georgia is more like 2018 Georgia-ish, in that range, maybe, 2017 Georgia-ish in that range, still a very, very good football team. This might be closer, to 17 points when it kicks off. You still have to like Georgia a lot, even in that scenario. And they do get them at home. So maybe it's around 20. Then we get UAB, a team that doesn't project to be terribly good next season. Georgia, again, this should be a game barring a bunch of turnovers, that Georgia's largely going to be able to get in, a lot of the starters in the second half. Georgia then gets Auburn. This Georgia, this Auburn team projects to be not terrible next season. That's again, that's sort of damning with being praised too. But that said, I do think, and they're going to get, they do get they get Hugh Freeze himself. And Freeze does run a somewhat of a fun offense. I don't expect Phil Montgomery to be calling plays there. Ron Roberts is a pretty good get at defensive coordinator for Auburn, I think. But I don't expect that it's all of a sudden going to be, that Auburn is a really competent football team next year. 20 might be a little high for them. Sort of depends. Freeze has been successful everywhere he's been, regardless of what you think about him personally. I don't know. I don't hire him to watch a dog. But you can hire him to, if you want to win football games, he might be your guy. And Auburn, Auburn wasn't exactly probably attracting A-list candidates there. But they do get this. Auburn does get him at home. My expectation is this game might be a little wider, barring some turnovers. This game could be closer to 25 by the time it kicks off. Georgia then gets Kentucky. Kentucky's really interesting. Another excellent case of, what happens when a team loses their offensive coordinator. Liam Cohen went back to be the offensive coordinator at the Rams. That Kentucky offense in 2021 was excellent. And that's why the quarterback still ended up getting drafted. But the defense last season is the one that took a really big step forward. They were really good. Last season, and that I think is something for them to. All right, who we got here? I got to go back and look. I've also been like, What the heck? All right. I got to look who the offensive coordinator is now for Kentucky, because it's definitely not that. That's not it. Thanks, Google search. Really great job. Unbelievable. My apologies that we are experiencing. This is what happens when you get on after a break, like a couple month break from really worrying about this or thinking about this stuff. There we go. Who do we got? I believe it's still, oh, great. Okay, there we go. Finally. So Brad White's back at defensive coordinator. That's a really good one. No way, really? Holy moly. They got Liam Cohen back? Kentucky's going to be fun. All right, so apologies. Glad I looked that up. Well, with Liam Cohen back, Kentucky could be a lot of fun coming into next year. Will Levis was significantly better with Cohen as his offensive coordinator. I think it's a really, that turns Kentucky into a potentially interesting team. It all depends on how the defense does overall too. While they were really good last year, they had shuffled along a little bit the prior two seasons. This game, with Cohen back, I might put this closer to 14, but Kentucky certainly a team to watch out for and has some positive upside coming the next season. Vanderbilt, Clark Lee's down to the studs rebuild will continue. This game should not be close in Nashville. My expectation, of course, is there are more Georgia fans than Vanderbilt fans of this game. The Florida game, look, Billy Napier's done a decent job. I think in year one with Florida, there's certainly some, bones to pick, I think, about how things, how things turned out for Napier, or it turned out for Florida last season. But the main thing for Florida, for last season, or for Napier, was of course keeping, and you've got is Napier's got to get the offense going. I mean, look, like he's gonna have a new defensive coordinator, coming on. His prior defensive coordinator was probably a little bit more of what made Billy Napier really good. The past couple, when he was building Louisiana into a Sun Belt power. Napier's going to have to get the offense going more. This is going to be, I think, a tough game for them, though. This is probably closer to maybe 14 points, depending on where Georgia's offense shakes out this season. Missouri should be improved. We've got them at 23 overall, as a potentially interesting, different team than maybe they've been in the past couple seasons. This one could be closer to 17 by the time it kicks off, depending on how, again, where Georgia's offense really shakes out. I like Drinkwitz, and for the most part, what he's got going at Missouri, but he's got to get the offense going a little bit more. They've really struggled there the past couple of years. Old Miss comes in. This is I apologize. It's like, who's coaching where? I looked it up for Georgia before I did this, but clearly did not before I got back to look at this. Good thing I actually okay, so they've got Golding in at DC. That's it. Like, look, Golding wasn't the problem at Alabama. The main problem for Alabama the last couple seasons was certainly on the offensive side of the football, where they've replaced Bill O'Brien. I do like the hire of Kevin Steele at Alabama. That's a really good DC get. I mean, and Saban certainly has nothing to worry about. Steele can't come after him and his job. Offensively, we may end up seeing Kiffin, again, maybe more and more involved in play calling and game planning that he's been the last couple seasons. Kiffin actually has really leaned in on, and brought in guys that incorporated a lot of run into the offense. Ole Miss has been a sneaky go to run team, incorporating guys that run that Art Briles offense. I think this one, with Golding there, maybe this is closer to 17, maybe 14. I mean, but if you're looking across most of these games, Georgia's going to be a really significant favorite in most of these. Even if the offense doesn't perform, you're going to likely have to have like a -2, -3 turnover night in order for them to get caught. That'll be a little different, I think, when they get Tennessee. Tennessee's offense, of course, has been really good under Heupel. You should absolutely expect that to continue. The bigger story for Tennessee is their defense finished last season at number 23 overall, but they were improving over year, and we should expect them to improve again. That might, and with some offensive regression from Georgia, that might make this a really interesting game. Maybe, and look, I mean, there's going to be another interesting game here or there where maybe Georgia gets a scare, along the way. Maybe if the turnover gods are really against them, they get knocked off. But the game that you're going to circle on the calendar for Georgia here is obviously this Tennessee game on the road. Tennessee's going to definitely be motivated, after getting humiliated a bit last season, even though I don't think the final score I think the final score was a lot closer than the actual game was. And then, of course, Georgia Tech's got a long way to go to get really competitive there. And that's it. All right, let's get to... Well, that worked. Not all the buttons don't work. So that's the Georgia Bulldogs. Look, I mean, I think there's some really interesting staff changes that took place at Georgia. I think there's some really interesting staff changes that we've covered. So there's certainly Liam Cohen coming back potentially makes Kentucky, more of a dark horse in the SEC East. I mean, we'll pump the brakes a little bit. We'll see. He was really, really good his 1 year in Lexington. The potential for Tennessee's defense to take a step forward, I think, while we talk about, Kentucky's or Georgia's offense likely to take a little bit of a step back with Bobo in place, I think does make that game more interesting and potentially more competitive. Across the way, I think if you're a Georgia fan, you're still in the driver's seat in the SEC East. And if you're going, if you're looking and saying like, all right, if we're going to get to, if we're looking ahead at the potential for the SEC title game, I don't think they're kind of in the same boat as Alabama, and that I don't think Tommy Rees is a really good offensive coordinator hire. We'll cover that and why I think that, and the data says that when we get to it, when we get to Alabama, which is a little further down. Alabama, of course, is recruited exceptionally well. Like I said, I like the Steele hire there. But if you're Georgia, that still probably feels like the game to watch out for. They're likely going to, they're likely still going to be in the driver's seat. The defense should be really, really good. I don't expect them to drop at all out of the top three defensively coming into next year. Of course, they're going to have to clean up a little bit what they do in the pass, defending the pass. But I think sort of in summary, though, Georgia's, and the reason this season is going to feel more wide open, Georgia coming back to earth a little bit brings them within striking distance of some of these other teams, and the Heupels of the world, the Sarkisians of the world, maybe even Florida State, who was really interesting and brings back a ton off of last year. There's still some guys that have put up really big offense in college football. They're just all head coaches now. I mean, Lincoln Riley too out at USC. And so some teams that, if Georgia and Alabama are sort of reverting back to, and I think if you look at, where their offenses might set up, like the kind of 2015-ish versions, of what we might think of as championship teams, it'll be really interesting to see. Like I said, scoring's taken a bit of a fallback after years of going up in college football. Last season, offenses came a little bit back to earth, and outside of Georgia and Tennessee came a lot back to earth last season. So it'll be interesting to see if anybody else is able to put up a really big number. You'd expect Tennessee to potentially still be able to get near that 2 range. Can anyone else? Now, I don't think Kentucky necessarily will this year, but they might make a big improvement off of where they were last year because they weren't very fun offensively last season. Anyway, I would still, I think Georgia should be really, really, really good right? They just may not be untouchable. And that I think makes college football really fun coming. I mean, I guess Georgia fans may not think that makes college football really fun coming in the next year. I think that makes college football really fun coming in the next year. This kind of thing is the entropy of college, the staff changes and turnover is the entropy of college football. It does feel like, in particular for like guys like Kirby Smart and Nick Saban, who don't seem inclined. I mean, Saban's not going back to the NFL. Kirby Smart doesn't seem inclined to go to the NFL. So the only real power to bring, the only real force to bring down programs like that with head coaches who aren't going anywhere is internal staff change. And hiring's hard. Those of you that do hiring, or those of you that do not, I do. Hiring is a hard problem to solve. And it's probably the most important thing, along with setting culture, that anyone in a leadership position does. And it's sort of been Nick Saban's superpower, and Kirby Smart has certainly over the past couple of seasons demonstrated himself to be excellent at it as well. So it'll be interesting to see this year, because I honestly, I couldn't believe it when they hired Mike Bobo. I couldn't believe it when Alabama hired Tommy Rees. I couldn't believe it when Notre Dame hired Parker. There were some head scratchers out there. Anyway, I'm excited for this season coming up. We'll keep rolling through. Next comes LSU, who returned some interesting pieces for next season that I think make them an interesting. I mean, and they've recruited, fairly well. LSU should be an interesting team. There's some other sort of surprise teams that we have projected in: Florida State, Texas in the top 10. You can tell me I'm an idiot all you want about that. That's fine. I think both of those teams showed significant improvement last year, even if it didn't always show up in the record. And that's one of the fun things about college football and doing college football data, is if you're looking below the record, looking to figure out what's actually going on in the games, wins and losses, the illusion of record can be a little misleading. Anyway, that's that. Let's wrap it up. So you can find all these and a lot more at sharpcollegefootball.com, including FCS from last year. You can find me at Beta Rank FB. You can also find me at Sharp College Football. I'll say this: I'll check it once a week and respond to questions. How about that? We've been on a real hiatus. TBD on what goes on with 12 Pack Radio. Got to figure that out. Anyway, thank you so much.